from your perspective, in a government agency, what would you say are the highlights of the economic transformation program?
The best thing Commando has done is exposed weaknesses in the delivery of the government system. Because what they did was to look at each government agency that does certain specifications, specific areas of excellence, and found that there were things wanting. So what Commando suggested, there was a template and a driveway for the agencies to change. For example, they looked at Malaysian International Trade and Investment, MITI, and MIDA. MIDA was called Malaysian Industrial Development Authority. And we found that we don't need the industrial output as much as we used to. So they changed the name to Malaysian Investment Development Authority. So the whole focus for Mandu changed MIDA into a investment development authority, where they now focus on investment into the country in all sectors, not just industrial sector. And so that is one of the things that they've done. For Bermuda's biggest achievement is to change government agencies' perception of how to do business in the new world order. And I think that is their biggest success story.
You also brought up another point earlier in our session. You talked about the lack of talent, and you talked about setting up a center of excellence. Do you think, and Talent Corp comes to mind when you talk about bringing talent back to Malaysia, what could we possibly do? Because bringing investment in Malaysia doesn't actually just involve monetary investment, it also involves talent investment. What would Talent Corp or any of the agencies be able to do under the ETP to bring the diaspora, the Malaysian diaspora, which is out there, about 1 million, back into the country and give them the attractive incentives to keep them here?
That won't happen overnight, because a lot of Malaysians have gone overseas and set up homes where they are. The first generation Malaysians who go overseas usually would want to come home, but the children may not necessarily have the same ideas. They might want to stay where they are. So again, you get a displaced family situation. I think that Talent Corp's biggest success is to be able to identify areas in which Malaysia has shortages. Now, Talent Corp has expanded its profile, not just bringing in local talent, but also attracting international talent to move to Malaysia as a training facility. That means they come here and train Malaysians to achieve a certain standard in professional. So when I talked to Ulrich earlier about putting your own union investments, 25, 30-year experience in asset management, that is something Malaysia could use. So if you brought that expertise across and set up a local training organization, you will get tax benefits for doing that from the government. So these are opportunities we are looking at from the talent side. Now, why I said talent was because we are now caught in the middle income trap. We have lots of universities, 17 government universities, 19 private universities. But the university graduates are coming out in denomination that may not necessarily be useful for the industries that are being newly created in Malaysia. So Talent Corp's job is to try and find out what are the new businesses that require what kind of talent and change. So postgraduate training is going to be very important in Malaysia as well.
Mr. Stadtfeld, you're about to segue into the Dutch disease conversation.
Well, Germany comes from a completely different background. And I hear this also from your words, by saying that Talent Corp should do research in what is required. It's an approach we wouldn't even think of in Germany. Our approach is that talent is developed, skills are developed by the private sector. And this goes back into the 14th, 15th century, when groups of businesses organized themselves in guilds and also set certain standards for training young people. And this responsibility is there today. So here, a company looking at the labor market, looking at employment, they expect that people come trained to them, or they take unskilled workers which train them. In Germany, it's a completely different approach. 2/3 of the young people leaving school enter into a training contract with the private sector. And it's something to understand and to think about. So it's not the responsibility by the government. The government plays a certain role in establishing a framework, a legal framework about responsibilities, about standards, quality control. But the responsibility for training is with the private sector. There's a complementary element in training schools. So 80% is done in the company, on the company level, and 20% in schools. And these schools are funded through public funds. This is the fundamental difference between Germany and most other countries around the world. It's a model which you find to quite the same degree, but already slightly less in Austria, and to a certain degree in Switzerland. Everybody outside of Germany is talking about vocational training standards in Germany, about dual vocational training. But there needs to be a fundamental mind change. We're trying to establish a project in this area, but there we also see, while trying to implement this into the Malaysian educational framework, how difficult it is to get people to follow these thoughts and not only say German training is a great thing, but certain things need to change in this country, would need to change if you really were to apply this.
Charles, your experience in capital markets and the talent in capital markets in Malaysia?
I think Malaysia has a unique advantage in the region, and I think if you look at the population base, we are multilingual, speak Bahasa, English. Kumar speaks about the Cantonese in the southern China, very highly affluent in Cantonese, also Mandarin, right? Bahasa. If you go to Indonesia, you can communicate very well. And I think we already have that foundation when it comes to and also education, right? The third point I would say is that in the capital market environment, I'm a Malaysian myself, working in Singapore, and for the past many years, I've often seen a lot of candidates from other countries. Obviously I'm biased, but generally the general perception, if you ask some other capital market, they would agree that Malaysians who tend to work in a broad capital market sector are generally more hardworking, hungry, ambitious. So I think the key here is that in order to promote talent, we already have that strong foundation. The key is how do you extract that foundation, and to me it's about providing the right opportunity, right? I don't think we can compete with the Chinese, with the Vietnamese, because they're all rising up the value added. I think the key here is to find a certain segment that we can compete effectively, because we don't have the population, right? We can compete in certain areas, right? We have the foundation. I think we have to identify maybe like areas like asset management, for example, right? I think the key here is providing the right opportunity and giving them the job opportunity to demonstrate.
Well, segues straight into Mr. Dischler's direct experience in managing this building.
Yes. Well, I mean, let me take one step from the outside view. So probably I have the least experience in Malaysia, but maybe also I lived in other countries. So my impression is basically, so if something could be improved for sure is in general the awareness that English is key, because if you want to attract any business from Japan, from Korea, from other countries basically, so is this still uniting language? So should be really infused to children from the very beginning as a language of communication. So second thing, so if you want to move up the value chain actually, so I think very critical. So, and this could be the government actually could support programs, education programs, send the young people to foreign universities. For sure, they get a foreign perspective and a more international view on things, and so they will receive actually high-level education that they can also bring back actually to implement into business practice in Malaysia, because you need this group of young leaders, and I've seen that in other countries. Young leaders actually who with the local people actually move up actually the potential for companies, for work stuff, for working levels. And then also third thing, what we know from Germany, actually German companies spend a lot of money in training junior staff. So because the companies are there, they're doing their business, and so for young people to come in is very common actually. So that we're taking through the entire company over a period of 2 years, and they learn everything from scratch. But then they understand actually the business needs. So I think those, and of course government can support certain initiatives in that regard, but then also it's private sector.
Imagine these companies pay these apprentices a salary. So they don't have to pay, they create already then, coming from school, having the school knowledge, but no further knowledge, no work experience, and they get paid a salary which is about 30 to 40% of an actual salary. And of course their contribution to the company in the first year would still be rather low because they are learning, but in the second and third year they let's say have an output of 70 to 90% at a salary of 30%. I mean, these are great great circumstances.
Plus they're also getting involved in the culture of the company, so they understand the management ethos and how the company operates, which is great.
I was thinking of this, you have a huge talent pool here in Malaysia which is completely untapped and which people usually don't think about. According to statistics from the Ministry of Education, only 20% of the young Malaysians coming out of school get a formal training. Most of them on university, college level. So you have 80%, I believe you have many motivated, intelligent people amongst this who are just left out of the equation. Nobody thinks about them because there's nothing on the offer which is attractive to them, is attractive to their parents. And this is where the EVT, Technical Education Vocation Training, could come in, but it needs certain contents, it needs certain standards. So we could show the way, but it's difficult. We are trying on a very small basis to get this into the minds and heads of the people.
But the positive side is that, as I take from Charles, the multiracial factor is a very important factor for Malaysia. I've traveled throughout the region, and the fact that we have 6.2 billion Chinese in Malaysia, 3.4 million Indians in Malaysia, represents a major minority factor, along with the Malay population. We find that Malaysia is becoming popular because foreign companies based in Malaysia are able to send their Chinese employees to China to trade and to become managers. And I've met many Malaysians, accounting, engineers, managers in China, managing shopping centers and performing accounting skills there. And the Malays have reached Indonesia and the Middle East. And I've met many Malaysians also in the Middle East and Indonesia. So as a country, we have been training people, but we've been losing a lot of them to better salaries overseas, purely because our focus on the industrial sector has been plantations and real estate. So we needed more brawn than brain. So we have 2 million foreigners workers here from all over the region, working in our factories, in our plantations, and in our entertainment and our F&B areas, purely because Malaysians are the ones that are good enough have an opportunity, have gone overseas, and the ones remaining behind are running the local industries and the local companies. And so there's a gap that we're trying to fill. So the gap is that the intelligentsia is overseas, and I really, instead of bringing them back, I'd like to see this whole sector here being raised up to manage the local sector, rather than try and bring a few thousand people back, because I don't think they can contribute. It's better for me to have someone like you bring 30 years of experience into Malaysia and set up a training center and expand your operations here, just like what Deutsche Bank has done in Malaysia and training locals as well. So each of the foreign companies that have large exposure in Malaysia have done a great deal in training locals to take over the businesses, because really they don't want to stay here forever. They just want the locals to run the business and make operational profits. So training has become a very important factor for Malaysia.
Basically localizing your international
Yes,
operations.
in a way, and we would always work with local partners. So we would, of course, also bring in some of our knowledge, but we would always also see that we get the level of quality actually with local partners. Now, I think the one point I just want to tap on actually that you made. I mean, moving up actually the quality level, because that also goes into the government's targets trajectory actually to move up actually the GDP per capita, the value
more
chain.
of a knowledge-based economy.
So I mean, having foreign workers for plantation for sure, which is not the highest end of the value chain, I think that's no problem really. The focus should be in really upgrading so the general level by separate measures actually, and to broaden the base. And I think for foreign for Malaysians living abroad, of course you need to also offer attractive jobs. So why should someone come back? I mean, many people like to live in their home country, but you need to offer opportunities on a competitive level.
That's right.
Well, let's close off that section and let's go to the much anticipated budget discussion. The budget is due to be disclosed on the 28th of February. And we discussed earlier today between us what the highlights of last year were. Let me throw the question to the Malaysian first. Mr. Kumar, what can we expect of this budget?
It's a pre-election budget. Elections have to be held by April next year. 6 months to go. The government, any government in the world, would not want to have a negative factor going into an election. Even in the US, I think Barack Obama is going to start easing number 3, so that he maybe can have a win in the election. So the Malaysian government is going to have a very people-friendly budget. Lots of goodies are going to be given out for the ordinary rakyat, the people. There have been many requests for changes in some of the tax modules. For example, REIT managers have asked for reduction in the REIT tax platform for individuals like Singapore to 0 from the current 10%. But Inland Revenue also has an issue with reducing tax because it impacts on their bottom line in terms. So they need to have an alternative tax source if they give away any tax source. There is concern about the high value of real estate in the capital city, which is actually more to do with a shortage of supply rather than speculation. But the government's concerned, and they may want to do what the Singapore government did in terms of putting taxes in place to slow down the marketplace. That is.
So are we talking about maybe an increase in the RPGT?
That's right.
Real property gains tax.
That's could be a possibility. It doesn't affect long-term investors who have more than 5 years in Malaysia, but it does affect speculators. It also covers public sentiment to a certain extent. Public sentiment is property prices have gone up too high in the last 3 or 4 years because of the ease of capital, bank lending, low interest rates. I'm just give you an example of low interest rates. 25 years ago, interest rate to borrow houses were about 8.5% to 11%. Today is 4.5%. So, in terms of affordability has gone up enormously, purely because interest rates have come down by more than 50%. So, these factors are what has influenced the property market to have a larger uptake. But at the same time, at some point, the government feels that there is just too high values when a simple 2-story terrace house goes for 1 million ringgit. So these are some of the issues they face. So I think it's going to be people friendly. They've taken some of the concerns from house owners. They've taken some of the concerns of the public sector. It's going to be also they're worried about the possible downturn in the economy over the next 6 months. Singapore is already facing a downward shift, so is Hong Kong. So the anticipation of that before the elections, the government probably want to reduce the pain locally by giving more concessions in either as handouts or in terms of tax-free opportunities.
Charles, what do you think? Capital markets?
I think Kumar made a couple of interesting points. There's several or I have several opinions relative to certain aspects that Kumar did touch upon. One is the RPGT. I think it's important to identify the difference between the residential and the commercial sector, because obviously governments around Asia are very concerned, given the QE3 is going to export inflation, uncontrollable inflation, to asset market in Asia, because there's a correlation between currency expectation as well as real estate, particularly in countries like Hong Kong. So I think if you think about the policies that has been consistent, whether you're in China, Hong Kong, or Singapore, the government has introduced concerted effort in order to cool down the asset price inflation, in particular targeting the residential, because it's highly unpopular. I mean, in Hong Kong and Singapore, when majority of the population is unable to afford dwellings, put a roof on top of the head. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for Malaysia to consider that. I think, for the better of the Malaysians to contain the excessive inflation. However, I think on the commercial side, we've had very good momentum, in particular in the REITs market, right? I'd like to also point it out that, REITs is also one of the Malaysian REITs is one of the best performing REIT in the world, not just Asia. So it's been quite successful. I think the key here is that if there is going to be an RPGT, my sense is that, or my hope is that, will be more maybe non-commercial that will not stop the growth of the asset management industry. Because when we talk about the asset management industry, we're talking about, we've had very productive dialogue today about, how the attraction of the securitized real estate market has improved the foreign direct investment. As we talk about, Ulrich potentially bringing his whole asset management team in KL to cultivate that and grow that industry. We talk about tapping the talent pool. We talk about, creating a liquid market in real estate, allowing developers to recycle their capital and redeploy and create more grade A specification and attract more multinationals. All that have, exciting spin-out benefits, right? So we want to make sure that when we have targeted tax policies, we don't halt that growth that we are currently enjoying, right? Or rather, we should promote it, right? How do we steer the tax? I mean, should we promote more fund management activities, asset management? Should we encourage more tax benefits to encourage, the Vale of this world or the multinational of this world to come and sign long-term lease and create a more robust securitization market? Or should we even attract overseas assets listing in Malaysia? We've got EPF being, significant source of capital investing in countries like London or elsewhere. Maybe we can use that as an advantage, right? In Singapore, for the last 10, 15 years, GIC has provided a carrot, right? If you want to take some of my funds under management, you got to set up an office here, right? Then maybe TRX will have fund management, spin-off benefits, right? So a lot of the benefits can be achieved indirectly, right? So I think tax is a fantastic tool, but I think we need to be looked at in the context. Real estate, we're entering into sophistication. Many types of real estate right now, right? There are certain types of real estate that benefits the economy as a whole, but there are certain types of real estate that may not benefit the economy as a whole. So we can have targeted.
Excuse me. So, getting to the one of the key issues from last year's budget was the liberalization of subsectors in services. From your point of view, what are the services sectors that you would like to see further liberalized?
Well, as I mentioned them before, this is logistics, financial services, telecommunication, and certain business services. But it's really not a budget issue. I know there's always these kind of policy announcements combined with the budget, but whether to do this or not doesn't need the budget. This can be done anytime. of the year. We don't have any expectations in this regard. Of course, as everybody else, we believe it's a people-friendly budget, but we also don't believe that great amounts of monies will be splashed out, because we do see a certain fiscal and budgetary prudence here in Malaysia. A concern, we don't see any specific benefits to the foreign or German business community. We are hoping that coming to budgetary funds, the policy to strengthen skills development, strengthen research developments initiative activities will be reflected in the budget. But we also have seen from, for instance, these entry point projects, 133 of them, that the focus of the government is the contributions by the private sector. So out of these funds, I don't remember the total figure, 90% should come from the private sector, and this is a good approach. So this is a prudent approach. One of the main concerns of on this checklist, as I mentioned, by German business is political and economic stability. And economic stability means prudent budget, financial fiscal controls. I think they will be in place. There will be nothing in the budget that contradicts this. On a medium-term view, which of course is not going to be solved in this budget, it means that Malaysia the government needs to find other sources of income. Currently, the budget relies to almost 50% on oil and gas revenues. This will not continue, not medium term, depending on how you define it, but at least not long term. So we see that it's necessary over the time, not in this budget, to reduce subsidies, to create tax resources like a general sales tax or goods and a general goods and services tax, but we don't see this coming with this budget.
Mr. Dishman?
Yes, well, generally I would say so. I think as you indicated, election year, so I would say
Very
also
similar.
from our view is very similar, so that is people friendly. So so the only thing that I also share Charles' view, so about LGBT, we should be very careful. So in which sector it will be applied, because we don't see any excess in the commercial real estate sector.
Yeah.
So in order to promote the sector, I would be very careful in trying to generate taxes in a way that could be deemed as a disadvantage. But other than that, I think is also, if you compare it with some other countries currently, actually, so the overall numbers actually look quite good. So nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah. Excellent. At this juncture, in the interest of time and also giving the media an opportunity to ask some questions, I'd like to open up the floor to the media. Any questions from the floor? Media participants?
Maybe the panelists can comment on the proposed GST. How would GST impact on businesses, especially from the German side?
The immediate factor would be to make certain products and services more expensive, but it's something that all competitors in this specific branch will face. It might slow down growth in certain areas a bit, because individuals or companies, business might reconsider buying products, certain investments. It depends also, of course, very much on the rate this will be introduced. As long as it is, what I would expect, in a single-digit area, I don't see any great impact. And one has to see that these additional revenues for the government also will allow the government to spur, to finance certain incentives, which again will benefit investments, will benefit demand. So it's a game which should balance itself off. Politically, it cannot be done too fast, but in my personal life, I've witnessed this happening in Germany, the value-added tax going up, and it did not really have much influence on people's lives, on let's say, investment strategies of business, but it creates a sound revenue source, a sound budget source for governments, and that is the important point. And it is something which not every individual might recognize, but as I said, for business it is important, and is a certain risk factor, not a destabilizing, but something which is important for business, which they can acknowledge and then accept.
Yeah, can I find out the future trend, the flavor of investments that are being attracted by Malaysia, and which MGCC itself would promote to investors in back home Germany, taking into account our current GDP transformation and everything? What would you be recommending German investors?
I would recommend first to the German business community to take a closer look at this country, because I believe that in Germany we still have an untapped potential of companies who are not doing enough on export markets, on foreign markets, as exporters, building up sales, service organizations, or as investors. And this is not based on our thinking, this is based on a survey by the German chambers, the 80 regional chambers, trying to assess how many companies are doing business abroad, and with the knowledge of the potential of these companies, coming to the assessment that there's still a large potential. We are not promoting specific industries. We of course know we are promoting more the factors which I mentioned during this talk earlier, and to inform companies in Germany on Malaysia, and to try to do away with certain misconceptions. So we are probably doing more than MIDA in Germany, although MIDA has an interest to promote investments in this country. As I said, investments, the precursor of investments is trade, foreign trade. So we are trying to reach German companies by organizing over the year at least 30 events on Malaysia, sometimes on ASEAN, together with colleagues from the region. So we travel to Germany. Our partners in Germany are the regional chambers who invite their members to such events, usually a sign of a little bit general presentation, but then one-to-one meetings with individual companies. And I believe through these initiatives and information which is provided to the German business community, we do our share in attracting business, German business, to Malaysia.
Any other questions from the floor?
Maybe one last question. Do you have a certain target figure on the Malaysian side for one, and the German side for another, the amount of investments that could be attracted to Malaysia within the next 5 years? Do you set targets as such on both sides, Malaysia as well as Malaysia?
You want me to answer?
Would you have certain indication of how big the trend is?
No, we as a chamber we don't have targets. So we're a private sector organization. That needs to be understood. For certain activities which benefit the whole German business community, also in terms of the government, we receive certain project funds from the German government. But our main source of revenues are paid business services to companies. Our typical client is a German SME. And we provide these services, and with this also are let's say a factor for Malaysia, because a German company can rely on a known network. So they know their regional chamber. There's a mandatory membership in Germany. they have quite a good idea what we can provide them with, who we are. So for instance, during the course of the first 8 months, we established 4 German SMEs, 12 companies here in Malaysia. And not all companies come to us. And even if they come to us, not all company will give this business to us. But from this we can see also from the work permits for expat staff which we process, that there's a constant inflow of German investment in this country. Nothing that will make it to the front page or to the front page of the business section, but in terms of overall volumes, number of projects, employment, if you add this all up, quite significantly.
Well, as we pointed out, the last 12 months stats showed 10.32 million euros in trade between Malaysia and Germany, effectively creating 25,000 jobs. So there is a fair amount of influence on what you're doing as well in terms of facilitating that progress. Charles, any last comments?
No, I think continue with the trajectory. I think it will continue to attract FDIs, not just from Germany, but everywhere else in the world. I think policy to promote business is very important.
Mr. Dishler, unions stand in Malaysia over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, we are open for opportunities. As we do have certain quality criteria, of course, they need to fit into our profile. But generally, our outlook is positive.
Excellent. Excellent. And Mr. Kumar, final.
I think Malaysia is a positive environment. A lot of people don't expect us to grow exponentially like Singapore. And because we have 13 states in the country, each state has grown separately. And so we've got this Selangor, Penang, Kuala Lumpur and Johor who are going to grow exponentially, and they're going to more than double the GDP over the next 4 or 5 years. And the other states are going to grow more slowly. So the disparity of income within those states is going to make young people migrate to urban cities. As it is, Kuala Lumpur's population grows by between 40 to 55,000 a year of young people from all over the country who graduate and don't go home. In fact, if I took a poll and asked around here, how many of you are born in Kuala Lumpur, I'd probably get only about 20%. 80% come from small towns all over the country who graduate and come to Kuala Lumpur to work. About 30% of the total graduates go to Penang, and about 10% go to Johor. So the talent pool is not distributed evenly. And just like any other country, London's talent pool is enormously compared to Liverpool. So is Europe, so is Germany. So I think Kuala Lumpur's growth, we target Kuala Lumpur's population. The greater Kuala Lumpur region constitutes 10 local boroughs. The population is now 6.2 million. Now that is why the MRT was planned from Kajang all the way to the north. Purely because we felt the government now feels that 6 million people can support an MRT, mass rail transit. Now along with the 10 local councils and the migration factor, we expect Kuala Lumpur's population to be 10 million by 2020, which means that the city will grow by another 4 million people over the next 8 years. Now the pressure on housing and services within the Klang Valley is going to be enormous. And so we need to address the issue of affordability of housing, affordability of services, not having a breakdown in the utilities. And these are some issues the government is facing. And Pamandu is actually looking at that because they see the inroads of an urban population votes differently from rural populations. Urban population has got broadband, they've got mobile phones, they can communicate with each other, they have international best practices with companies like you here. So, they can compare. They say, how come I don't get those services here? Where's my Starbucks? Where's my fine dining restaurant? So these demands are going to increase. So one of the challenges for any government is how to look after the people in the capital city. That's what we're trying to face.
Which means more opportunities for German companies.
That's right.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Building MRT.
That's right. Exactly. I guess that concludes our session today. I'd like to invite Carol Billy, who is the local representative for Union Investment, to present some complimentary gifts to our guests.